Welcome to Halftime Talk feature interview. Our featured speaker this week is Max Torres, Managing Director at Plata Energy. Welcome, Max. And I'd like to kick off the interview by asking you about the recent re-entry of Chevron into Venezuela. Many international analysts still remain pessimistic about Venezuela's capacity to increase production. We still have US sanctions in place. What is your take on the issue?
Thank you, Ignacy. Thank you, Gulf Intelligence, for having me. Well, Venezuela, as you know, is the elephant in the room in Latin America. Venezuela is a country with very large volume of reserves. They claim that they have 304, as a matter of fact, billion barrels, of proven reserves. So obviously, that figure gives Latin America the privilege to be number one in proven reserves. So Venezuela, obviously, is a very large, a very important player in the world. Having said that, unfortunately, in the last 20 years, Venezuela is going through some political instability, lack of transparency, let's say, especially for business. I had a privilege to work in Venezuela many years, about 10 years, 2000, 2010 with Repsol. And, it is a very rich country as far as potential and capacity. Unfortunately, right now is in a very difficult spot. They are producing near 700,000 barrels of oil per day, which is a very small number, coming down from 2015, 2016, where they were producing close to 1.8 million barrels of oil per day. So, dramatic drop, in 7 years, or so, close to 1 million barrels, of lost production. So Venezuela, unfortunately, for basically stagnation of the industry, lack of investment, inefficiencies, and so on and so forth, is losing production every day. So back to your point and to your question about Chevron, as a result of the invasion in Ukraine, which is probably the most important event in the last years, the whole supply chain has been disrupted, and essentially, U.S. is rethinking its strategy with Latin America and with Venezuela. In that context, they decided to allow Chevron to start negotiating some contracts and a little bit of revamping the production. So as a result of that, in the last 2 or 3 months, we've seen a slow increase in production from 670,000 barrels in December to 750, which is today. Okay, which is not much. Obviously, it's a very insignificant number in the context of Latin America and the world, but it's giving you a signal that this lifting of sanctions in some areas, in some companies, could make a difference. And obviously, this is a drop in the bucket. This is not much, but I think it's sending a signal. So to your question, I think Chevron could make a difference. Chevron has been a very important player historically in Venezuela, in many areas, in Maracaibo, in heavy oil. They were players in the Faja, in the Hamaca projects, which used to be Chevron Texaco at the time. So Chevron is a very, very important player in Venezuela. I think they can make a difference if they decide to, fully invest and fully put, their efforts in Venezuela. I've seen other signals. The U.S. just lifted sanctions for the Trinidadian government for the Dragon field. I think Friday, they signed an NDA
Yeah, I
between.
actually wanted to ask you about it. Are there any other actions that the U.S. might still
Right,
need to take
right,
for the Venezuela's oil industry to take off?
right. Well, I think U.S. needs a reliable partner in the region. I think that an important supplier. As far as obviously can self-sustain. With shale oil, but I think Venezuela is a very important regional player for the U.S. and the geopolitical context. Especially what's going on in Europe. So if they can slowly start lifting sanctions, this Dragon project is the Trinidadian government, but they have the backing of Shell. Shell is the partner of the project. And in the table Friday, there was the Trinidadian government, the Venezuelan government, and Shell representatives. So this is an important milestone also for the advance of lifting sanctions in Venezuela. Dragon project is a gas offshore project, about 4 or 5 TCFs. They're going to supply gas to Atlantic LNG in Trinidad, about 300, 400,000 million cubic feet per day, which is a significant number. It's a good number, production. Trinidad, as you know, is an important player in the region. They need the gas for the LNG trains. They are a supplier of Europe. They've been historically a supplier of Spain, mainly. I worked in that project that used to be owned by Repsol at the time, and BP. So yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned the gas production, which might come in handy given the current context in the region regarding natural gas. We see many countries like Ecuador, Brazil, Argentina that are pretty much undersupplied, and also Colombia that's nearly full depletion. At the same time that different European countries are rushing to get their hands on other gas suppliers. And how do you see this can contribute to these new discoveries, new production of gas? How can this contribute to the region? And how do you see in the broader sense, how do you see the current context for natural gas in Latin America?
Yes, a very interesting question. Thank you for the question, Ignacy. Again, Venezuela is the elephant in the room. They have about 200 TCF of proven reserves, mostly related to associated gas. That means that they need to increase the oil production in order to get the gas reserves. They don't have many free gas fields. Dragon field is one. The Perla field in the Gulf of Venezuela is another one. That used to be a Repsol project. I discovered that field in 2007. So in the region, there are not many. If we put aside Venezuela, which already have, we have discussed the problems, geopolitical problems in Venezuela. If you go to Ecuador, Colombia, Peru, Argentina, even Brazil, there is a lack of gas. I mean, there's a lack of supply. Colombia is near balance. Colombia, with the current consumption of 1 BCF per day, they're going to run out of gas in probably 3-4 years. There are some significant discoveries in the offshore, but that needs investment, needs proper infrastructure that they don't have at the time. Then Peru, they have these large projects called Camisea, which is owned by Plus Petrol and other companies. Those are old fields, also near depletion. Bolivia used to be a gas-rich country, exporting to Argentina, exporting to Brazil. They are also getting close to depletion. They've been producing for many, many years. And maybe they become importers of gas. Argentina, they have the Vaca Muerta, which is a gas-rich play. Unfortunately, Vaca Muerta, as you know, is tight oil, tight gas, and shale oil and shale gas. They need very heavy investments in the current geopolitical, environment. There's a lack of investments. And it's slowly picking up, but it's a lack of investment, lack of infrastructure. So unfortunately, Vaca Muerta is not a player at the moment. Brazil is also, lacking gas. So basically, we see that Latin America is not going to be a reliable supplier for Europe. If that's the point.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. You mentioned before as well the political situation in Venezuela. You mentioned the lack of efficiency and transparency, and now you also brought it up in the case of Argentina. How do you see the current political status of the region playing in? What role do you see it playing in the coming months in the energy markets?
Well, unfortunately, Latin America has been slowly moving to the left. The most recent addition to this status quo is Colombia. Colombia had elections about a year ago or something, and they basically the left President Petro is left its government. He used to be a guerrilla fighter in the 90s. Also, more recently, Lula da Silva in Brazil just won the elections in Brazil. So the picture that we see in Latin America as far as transparency and reliability, for investments, I think basically it's a grim picture for the future. If you put things into the geopolitical context, I think investors are going to look elsewhere, in these type of settings. Ecuador is the only country probably right now that remains on the right, trying to attract investments. They had several bid rounds in the last few years, but unfortunately, Ecuador had a lot of problems with dealing with corruption and other issues. So they've been not very successful in attracting investments and revamping and increasing production. So geopolitical context, Mexico is also another country that is, slowly moving to the left. President López Obrador, he's not signing new contracts. He's not making the life easy for the current contracts. So basically, unfortunately, Latin America, with all its potential, Venezuela, Mexico, Brazil, is not showing a bright future as far as investments. Argentina is going to have elections by the end of the year. Argentina may change political signature, and that could, regain, some kind of momentum, as far as investment, especially for Vaca Muerta. Vaca Muerta is a world-class play, 20 billion barrels, approximately, 100 TCF of gas. So basically, it's a very, very major player in the world context. But Argentina right now they don't have the elements, to attract investments.
So you see a downward trend regarding oil production and reserves in the region.
Well, I see a lack of investment, basically. I see a lack of transparency, a lack of investments, a lack of. I see destructive policies as far as the oil and gas industry. Recently Colombia, is showing a lot of changes, in the administration, and basically all this is going to have an impact on reserves and production. Brazil, despite being a government from the left, Brazil will probably maintain the rules of engagement, and Brazil will probably continue the upward trends of production and reserves. So from all this picture that I paint you, probably Brazil is the only one that's going to keep growing because Brazil has a sensible policy when it comes to oil and gas. Regardless of the left or the right, they keep, on the same trend, and companies seem satisfied and happy. So basically, we're going to see an upward, trend in Brazil. Brazil is the star of Latin America today. They're producing about 2.5, 2.8 million barrels a day, proven reserves in the range of 15 to 17 billion barrels. Pre-salt play is a fantastic play. And hopefully I hope we can see some changes in Venezuela, lift your sanctions, and this could change the whole equation, of course.
Absolutely. And I wanted to ask you about Russia's involvement in the region. We've seen recently the CEO of Rosneft, Igor Sechin, visiting Venezuela and Cuba recently, and trying to push for a closer energy cooperation with countries in the region. What are you seeing from these advances?
Well, going back to the previous question, in this political context, most of the countries been in the left. China and Russia, they have their ambitions over the reserves, not only oil and gas, but minerals, lithium, copper, other resources that Latin America is very rich. So I think there's a strategy of Russia and China, to try to gain ground in some of these countries. This recent visit of the minister to Venezuela is just another indication. But to be honest with you, I don't think that is going to make much of a difference. Russia has been in Venezuela for many, many years. Right now, they have 5 joint ventures in Venezuela. They are producing close to 80,000 barrels of oil per day, between 80,000 and 100,000, which is really for Venezuela is meaningless. It's not significant. They have not been very successful as far as making a difference. Despite that they already have joint ventures, they already have a footprint, and a signature in the ground in the industry in Venezuela. So basically, this visit, I see just that's another geopolitical, message. They have their ambitions. I think Russia has a lot of problems. I think they're going to be not in a position to gain much ground in Latin America in general and in Venezuela. But certainly they have their ambitions. The same thing as China. China is very aggressive, trying to secure especially lithium in the region. And so again, geopolitical status quo being on the left, these are the countries who are going to try to support, not only from a resource point of view, but also from a financial point of view. Russia has lent to Venezuela close to $17 billion, up to now. So Venezuela main partner is Iran, as you know. Iran has been helping Venezuela a lot. Iran has a lack of technology, a lack of resources also. So I don't think that is going to make also any difference, So, going back to your question, I see the movements. I don't think that they're going to mean much, in the future for Latin America.
Coming back to that point you made before about the lack of investments across the region, do you think these approaches from Russia to different countries, such as we said, Cuba, Venezuela, can that end up translating in a ramp up in investments?
Iran, up in investments?
Russian investments in Latin America.
Yeah, sure. I think they are going to try to invest in Latin America. But as I said, basically, I don't see much results there basically because they have a lot of other problems in the world. I don't think that they're going to have the resources or the financial means to gain ground in Latin America, despite the favorable conditions that they have.
And I want to ask you about, we've seen recently in the global energy context the importance of, well, we see this energy trilemma gaining the central stage between balancing between the energy transition, the cost of energy, and also the energy security in the sense of having access to energy. How is that taking shape in the region? Can you see one leg being more, countries being more oriented towards one of these 3 legs than others? Is maybe energy security being more prioritized than the energy transition, or how do you see this point?
Very interesting question. Let me say from the very beginning, I'm not a believer in transitions. I think the world has other problems, much bigger than energy transitions or climate change. That's my personal view, and that's how I see things. Specifically in Latin America, I think I'm sure you're aware that Latin America is a very poor region. We're talking probably 35% of the population being poor, under poverty, and about 15% being under extreme poverty. Okay, so those are very large numbers, very important numbers. Argentina, just to give you an example, they're talking about probably 50% under poverty. And Argentina is a very rich country. Okay, so going back to your question, I think there's a balance between the genuine ambition of a country to create wealth through the resources and the transition and the clean energy. I think Latin America, they don't have a problem of lack of clean air or pollution. The emissions from Latin America are 4%. In the world context, the energy matrix in Latin America, is renewables, hydroelectric. They are about 30% of the energy matrix. Compared to other parts of the world, the developed world is about 10 to 15%. So if you put everything into one play, basically, I should say that the main problem that Latin America has is defeating poverty and creating wealth through the resources. They have the means, they have the reserves, they have oil, gas, minerals, other natural resources, and I think the problem in Latin America is the poor policies, the poor administrations, which are driving these countries into and these populations into poverty. So
at the same time,
going back to go ahead.
Yeah, at the same time, we've seen countries like Chile that they are carrying out very ambitious renewable energy programs. They're deploying solar, wind, and they're also sitting on some of the largest reserves of copper, lithium. Do you see this can become the example to follow from other countries in the region, in the sense that can we see more investments in renewables?
I think we're going to see investments in renewables for sure. I think we're going to see investments in solar and wind. I think that the transition is ongoing, and I think it's unstoppable. I think there's a whole agenda behind the transition. Most of the NOCs in the region, Ecopetrol, Petrobras, and YPF, most of these companies are with the transition agenda. Some are more strong than others. Ecopetrol has a very, very strong, transition agenda. I think they're taking the wrong approach because Colombia, they don't need a transition. What they need is wealth creation, not transition. But that's my personal view here, my personal take. And Chile, they don't have oil and gas, so basically they need to import most of their energy. So I think in the case of Chile, I think there's a genuine ambition to have their own energy. So I think in their case, they are creating wealth through copper and through lithium and transferring this wealth into renewables, which is a good thing because they don't have oil and gas. They import gas from Argentina, sometimes from Peru. So they have LNG coming from Peru. So basically, they are paying very expensive prices from this imported gas from Argentina or Peru or elsewhere. So basically, I think in the case of Chile, I think there's a very important steps that they're taking just to secure their own energy matrix. That is not the case of Argentina or Colombia or Brazil or Mexico, countries that they have their own resources and they have extreme poverty that they need to fight before any transitions or any clean energy. I think the clean energy agenda is a good thing for the developed countries, where you see an issue with contamination and lack of environmental practices. So I think that there's a clean, there's a direct relationship between development and clean energy, and the move into especially in the large cities, you need to have electrical cars and all, but Latin America, they don't have this problem. So to me, I think the agenda for clean energy is not applicable to Latin America. That's my personal view again. And I think what Latin America needs to do is just use the resources to fight poverty. That's what they need to do with sensible policies and reliability for investors. That's what they need to do.
Certainly.
Monetize the resources. Monetize the resources, basically.
Absolutely. That also seems to be the point you mentioned about the pattern of the more developed the country is, the greater the focus on renewable energies. That seems to be the case, and we're seeing also this trend, this coming up since the last COP that took place in Egypt, where we've seen more a greater focus put on the compensation aspect from developed countries to developing ones, in the sense that they've been it's a historical claim to request more funds to adapt to climate change and its possible effects. And I'd like to ask you about the Middle East OPEC producers. Where do you see they can play a role in producing countries from Latin America?
I think, as we've been discussing, I think Latin America, they lack investments. I think the Middle East being the country with the largest, production and is the second area with reserves. I'm sorry, it's the first one with reserves. I'm sorry, but basically, I think they can contribute with technology, and they can contribute with funds and investments to develop Latin American resources. I think in the recent years we've seen some movements, especially from Qatar into Brazil, deepwater Brazil, and I think there's a tremendous opportunity for Middle Eastern countries to bring technology. Bring professional help, advice to countries like Venezuela. Right now, probably you're aware we have some emerging plays like Guyana and Suriname. Guyana, they've been through a very, very successful spell of discoveries. They had approximately 30 discoveries in a row between Guyana and Suriname. This is an emerging play. This is an area that they claim right now that they have close to 15 billion barrels of reserves. This area, this region, could become one of the major players in the world. Probably producing 2-3 million barrels of oil per day. Right now, most of this acreage is in the hands of Exxon, but these regions, they are going to need infrastructure. They're going to need many other things, to develop these resources. So I think the Middle East countries, basically they can provide, support and help to develop these resources. And I will point out, pre-salt Brazil, Guyana and Suriname, and Mexico, if eventually Mexico opens up again to foreign investment. Mexico has a tremendous undeveloped potential in the offshore, for example. They've been, in the recent years, very nice discoveries in the offshore Mexico. Repsol, ENI, and other companies, they've been discovering, large fields, 100 million barrels, 200 million barrels. So basically, I think Latin America has a lot, and of course Venezuela. I mean, we go back to Venezuela. Venezuela would need, huge amounts of health and investments if they decide to open to the foreign world. And I think Middle East could be the primary source for investment, but also for technical and professional support.
And for my last question, I'd like to ask you about your view on the supply side of global markets. We're seeing that markets, oil production is still underinvested, but still seems that supply still is not an issue at this point today in the market. But what is your take for the fall of this year?
I think in general, we are going through a spell of underinvestment in the oil and gas industry, and I think we're going to pay the price in the future. I think large outfits like BP or Repsol or other companies, moving too far into the transition agenda is going to have an impact in the future. Most of the American companies, they are more cautious about how they move into the transition, but the European companies, they are very aggressive, transforming themselves into utilities companies instead of oil and gas companies. So my concern is that this spell of underinvestment, or this period of underinvestment, is going to have an impact on the future. Basically, what you see right now is a dramatic decrease in exploration investments all over the world in the companies. We see a dramatic decrease in capex, in most of the oil companies. Basically, companies are, through the policy or the strategy of buybacks, they are buying back their own shares, as value creation instead of investment in oil and gas. And also we see policies going into the right direction in the US, for example, not providing all the support financially and administrative to the shale oil and the shale gas in the US. So in general, I think the world is moving, in my view, in the wrong direction. I think if you see the trend of growth of the oil and gas in the last 20 years, we have something like 37-40% growth of oil and gas consumption. And not only oil and gas, but energy consumption. And this is related, obviously, to the growth of the economies, and is related also to the population growth and to the emerging countries, which are, slowly getting developed. And if we keep up this trend, I don't think that the renewables can support this type of growth. And I see all the forecasts saying that we're going to basically enter into a plateau in 2030, that we're going to need, no more gas, and oil in 2030. In my view, I think those forecasts somehow are wrong, and countries are not in a situation, especially in the economic context of recession that we're going to see probably in Europe for sure, and maybe in the US, to put up with investments that renewables will need.
Yep. But at the same time, this week we've seen a pretty bearish trends in oil prices. Also, besides the different economic turmoils that we've seen in all over the weekend in the US and also in other parts, won't there be demand destruction based on these recent events?
Most likely, most likely. I was listening this morning that UK and Europe is going to enter a recession, or they are already in a recession. So you will see demand destruction for sure. And US, is not in a recession. Numbers are very strong. Unemployment is about 3%, which is a historically, very low number. 3.4, I think. Very, very low number. So probably US is not going to go into a recession, but you will see probably a period of slow growth, in the coming years. And that is reflected in the price of energy, in the price of oil. Basically the players are saying, okay, there's going to be a recession, there's going to be this demand destruction, so price should go down. Maybe that is the case. If that is the case, essentially we will see a demand destruction in the next 5 years. And if going back to the point of the transition, I think we're going to see a lack of investments in renewables. I think that there's a key point here. Value creation. Renewables cannot create double digits numbers of value creation. I mean, the renewables right now are single digits value creation. So essentially, investors, they're gonna move with the flow, but at some point they're gonna say, okay, I'm not making the money that I used to make with the oil and gas industry. So that's another point. This besides the question, but I think it's an important issue for investors, to seek maximum returns on their investment. And renewables are not giving those type of returns. And I think the companies who are transforming themselves into utilities, and electrical companies like BP and Repsol, they are going to see their shareholders having a voice, in the future saying, okay, you're not giving my returns. You're not the company that you used to be. So I don't know, going back to your point, I see that we are going to come into probably a slow growth period in the next 5 years due to demand destruction and recession for various reasons. I think one is the Russia crisis, and the other one is probably a banking crisis that we are seeing in our door right now.
And can we also expect? Can we also expect demand destruction in Latin America?
I don't think so. I don't think we're going to see much of a recession in Latin America. Latin America is going through a slow growth period as well. Probably the only region that is going to grow, a steady pace is going to be Far East, China and Far East. But I don't think that Latin America is going to go through a recession. I think we're going to see slow growth for sure. Latin America is a region that is fighting against poverty, and I think that should be the first mandate for all the governments. And I don't think we're going to see demand destruction. I'm going to see demand destruction in Europe for sure, and maybe the US. Which are the two most important regions in the Western world, at least.
Seems, Max, we are a bit over the time already. We'll have to wrap it up here. Thank you so much, Max Torres, managing partner at Plata Energy. Thank you for your comments, your insights, and please follow Gulf Intelligence on social media to stay updated on energy market developments and insights from experts. Thank you, Max.
Thank you, Ignacio.